Hello, welcome. I'm Rebecca Robertson. I'm president of the Armory, and we're so glad that you're here for this wonderful talk. And I want to thank Roberta Uno from ArtChangeUS. I don't know if Roberta's here. And Damien Wetzel, who actually just finished a really beautiful work and with the Aspen Institute, and as you probably all know, soon to be with Juilliard. So I'm very delighted to discuss our two panelists, or to introduce our two panelists. Nancy Buirski, whose latest film, The Rape of Recy, has been highly acclaimed. It is an extraordinarily moving work. And she will be discussing this film with Susan Fales-Hill. So let me just introduce Susan and Nancy.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for being here. We must acknowledge the fact that it's a sign of hope and progress that we are here in this building, which was built for gentlemen officers after the Civil War as a bastion of WASP privilege. It was a bulwark against class warfare at a time when there were a lot of riots in the streets, and that this building is now being repurposed to celebrate our common humanity and explore all of the questions that unite and divide us, I think should give us hope at a dark time. So just wanted to say that. So Nancy, we are so excited to discuss your magnificent and searing film, The Rape of Recy Taylor. How many have seen it already?
Oh,
okay,
good.
and there's a screening at 4 for those who haven't. Do you want to give people the broad strokes for those who haven't seen it so they understand what we're discussing?
I'll be happy to. It seems like most of you have seen it, so I'm going to be very brief and not give away any spoilers either. But the title basically tells you a lot. And it was a challenging title to use, by the way. Maybe we can get into a conversation about that, but it's not always easy to decide to use the word rape in a title, but we felt very strongly that we should do it. This is a story about an African-American woman, age 24, a sharecropper, mother, who is living in Abbeville, Alabama, who is gang raped as she's coming home from church. She gets kidnapped on the road by 7 white boys in a car. 6 of them then go ahead and do gang rape her that evening for about 4 or 5 hours. And she is then left on the side of the road. What's extraordinary about Recy Taylor, by the way, what happened to her was not unusual. In fact, it wasn't even rare. It happened a lot during that period in Jim Crow South. What didn't happen a lot was for the woman, the victim of this, or survivor of this gang rape, to speak up. She was threatened. They were told they wouldn't let her go if she did speak up, but she did. Right away, she went to the sheriff, and her family went with her, and she spoke up loud and clear. I think that's probably what I want to say for now. There are some interesting developments that happen after she speaks up, and what she does effectively is she and others fight to get justice for her. That's a story.
So, and this is in 1944.
That's correct.
And so at the height, really, of Jim Crow and before the civil rights movement has taken off. This is actually, though, a catalytic moment in the civil rights movement, as this film shows, and yet it's a very little-known story. How did you come across this story? How did you find it?
Well, there's a funny story about this, and it also underscores why I made it and what made it so important to me. I was making a film on a narrative version of the Emmett Till story, and for complicated reasons, it kind of fell apart. It turns out that Jay-Z and Will Smith wanted to do a very similar film, and I didn't feel like
bigger names on the
bigger
other
names,
line.
right? So I didn't feel I was going to go up against them, and then my producer on that film, a woman named Amy Tiemann, handed me this book called At the Dark End of the Street by Daniel McGuire. And I read the book, and I thought, how is it that I don't know this story? How is it that I don't know about the staggering number of rapes that were taking place during that time? How did I not know about Recy Taylor? Why is this a hidden story? And, I think it goes a little bit to another kind of question that comes up a lot, and why a white woman told this story. Mm-hmm. And I think that these things conflate to a reality that we have to recognize, and that is that a lot of black women, I believe, knew this story, were familiar with the staggering number of rapes that were taking place. If they hadn't lived through it, their mothers or grandmothers or aunts had in some way. So it wasn't a surprise to them. There wasn't a lot written about it, but anyone who read about it, if they were African American, probably didn't find this such an incredible discovery.
Well, it was a common fact of life.
It
there
was
something called
exactly.
kitchen rape. It was written about a lot also in the black press.
So you know, many African American women lived through this and may not have wanted to tell it, even if it occurred to them to do that. But I think that filmmakers often get inspired to tell a story partly because it is new to them and it is a discovery, and they feel if we don't know it, then so many other people don't know it. So I think that was part of the motivation, that I didn't live in that community.
But let's stay on a touchy subject for a moment, if you,
Sure.
if you will. There was big controversy when a white artist exhibited a painting of Emmett Till at the Whitney Biennial recently.
Right.
There were demands to take it down. This is a very sensitive moment for cultural appropriation. Who gets to tell whose story? It's not a great moment for black-white feminist relationships, and frankly speaking, black women have not yet forgiven white women, the 53% who voted for the man in office. So there's that mistrust. So how do you answer people who say, why do you tell this story? Why?
I think it's a great opportunity to talk about who tells the story and what is so human about this story, what is so American about this story. That this is a story, race in our country is the American story. It's the American tragedy. And I feel like whites are, well, many of us are complicit in a way. We've inherited the burden of what it means to be white in this society and impose our laws and our bigotry and our bias against African Americans. And I don't mean our specifically, I mean metaphorically. And so I just feel a responsibility in a way to tell these stories. I know that I won't tell it the way a black woman would tell it, and I know black women will tell this story, and I hope they will. But I feel like if we don't tell these stories, that in a way we retain our complicity, that we can't leave these stories hidden, we can't bury them. So
the silence has been the problem, and
that's right.
Of course, because this is around just the fact. Let's talk about that, because even the fact they didn't want you to call it the rape of, when that is the seminal fact, and it's
right.
one of the more disturbing things in American history that everyone wants to, no one wants to believe. Jefferson raped people. Why? How did that battle come about?
I mean, we have to
title?
remember that we have to sell the film, and
Right.
there are a lot of people that were concerned that if we call it the Rape of Recy Taylor, we won't get butts in seats, and that's a commercial reality that we deal with every day. But we felt, our team of filmmakers, and there are a number of them in the audience, Susan Margolin and Claire Chandler, and others who felt very strongly, as I did, that if Recy Taylor was courageous enough to speak up and call it what it was, then we have to do the same, that we would be dishonoring her if we didn't call it the Rape of Recy Taylor. So we knew we were risking we were taking a chance. Who knew that the Me Too movement would spring up right after this film came out? And now everybody feels that we were so prescient and that we were so smart to call it the Rape of Recy Taylor. And I think we were, but the timing was fortuitous, to say the least.
Well, and some have called the Recy Taylor case really the precursor to the Me Too movement. But one of the things this film does, like the book that partially inspired it, although not entirely, The Dark End of the Street, is to reframe the civil rights movement as a battle for bodily integrity, as a battle to protect the bodies of black women, and looking at how sexual violence was used as a tool to terrorize, but also to control.
Right.
So one of the big revelations is, of course, the role of Rosa Parks, who comes in as a young investigator for the NAACP.
She just gave you a spoiler here.
Sorry. All right. Well, it's not exactly Get Out, so.
Right. No, that's true.
It says horrifying in certain ways, but I'm sorry, I apologize.
No, it's fine.
I will pay for your ticket to see some other movie so that I
No,
make
this
up
is
for
where
that.
we want people to go to it. And in fact, Rosa Parks acts as a kind of, she provides a kind of comforting atmosphere for the film. You know, she's considered she's called the mother of the civil rights movement, and her maternal role in our collective consciousness is important, and I think it's one of the things that makes this film maybe easier to watch.
But she's not depicted as that comforting mother in this film.
No, that's what's revealing about the film, that we discover that she's an activist, and she had been an activist for many years. In fact, she was the secretary with the NAACP in Montgomery since 1943, and of course the Montgomery bus boycott happens in '55. So that's how many years she was formally an activist, and even before that she was. So, you know, you'll see other reasons in the movie what inspired her activism. But, you know, she's not alone. I mean,
and it didn't end with this case either, because there was a committee formed to fight for the rights of Recy Taylor, but then when that didn't pan out, they went on to defend other people, and there's a direct line between this case and the Montgomery boycott.
I think that's what's so interesting about the scholarship that we used to tell this story. Danielle's book and other scholars make this link between what happens to Recy Taylor and the fight for her justice and the more universal fight for bodily integrity among so many African American women that really powers the civil rights movement. This is what has motivated them for years to fight for their rights. And ultimately, when you've got the Montgomery bus boycott in '55, it doesn't take long for these women to decide not to ride the buses. It's not just a principle. It's not just because they don't want to move their seats. It's because they're tired of being molested day in and day out.
So you did an enormous amount of research, obviously, when preparing for this film. What were some of the things that took you aback or surprised you as you were?
Well, the whole story, really.
Right.
You know, the numbers of women who were molested, the fact that this is systemic in the culture, that boys who did this never thinking they were going to be arrested, and felt like it was kind of a coming of age, a rite of passage kind of activity. And they inherit that mindset from slavery, from life on plantations, where, you know, plantation bosses and masters felt they had a right to go into the slave quarters and rape at will black women because they owned those women. They literally did own those women.
Well, the white Southern diarist Mary Chestnut famously said, the men live like the patriarchs of old with their wives and concubines. The mulatto children exactly resemble the white.
Right.
And a white woman can tell you who the mulattoes on every other plantation's fathers are, except her own, who fell from the sky.
Yeah.
So it's part of our American heritage. This film really reminds us of the words of William Faulkner: "The past is never dead; it isn't even past."
Right.
There's some beautiful voices in the film, and there's some rather chilling voices. You interview the relatives, brothers of some of the rapists, a historian, and there's still a denial. Can you talk a bit about what it was to sit with those gentlemen?
Well, it was chilling, and you know, there was never a moment where we didn't think they needed to be in the movie, because it was very important to remind people that the past isn't past, and that these men, they're in denial. If they're even in denial, they may not be in denial. They may feel like what their brothers did was fine, and part of a culture that they grew up with. And so the fact that there is that mindset that still exists, I would assume that there are many fewer people who live in Abbeville, Alabama, who feel this way today as compared to those who felt that way in 1944. But the fact that there are any at all is really chilling. You know, I did a film years ago called The Loving Story. And we
about the famous Supreme Court case that
the
struck
interracial,
down the anti-miscegenation
exactly. Loving v. Virginia, Mildred Loving, who was black, and Richard Loving, who was white, and are arrested for marrying in. They actually move to DC. They go to DC to get married, but they come back to live in Virginia, and they are They're arrested, they're thrown into jail, and they take their case to the Supreme Court. At the end of the movie, we make the case that the Supreme Court, who did rule in their favor unanimously, that overturned all the anti-miscegenation statutes in the country. However, there were a few states that held out, and South Carolina only agreed to this statute, the reversal of this statute in 1998, and Alabama in 2000. And when Alabama agreed to overturn this statute, many of the people still voted against that. They had a referendum, and many people still voted against it. So it is kind of alarming, and we need to remember that not only is history not past, but I don't even think of this film as history. I think of it as reality reconsidered, that we're still living in this moment. Mm-hmm. And there's something, you know, painfully current about this story. Mm-hmm.
You just screened the film in Alabama just before the election that pitted Roy Moore,
right,
doing normal things that men do, go prowling around the mall, against the man who won, thank God.
Right.
So how was that screening, and
well,
what?
we only decided to screen it a few days before the election, so I'm not sure how many people actually came out and how many people were affected by it, but one thing we do know is that African American women appear to have a big impact on the election and did deny Roy Moore his Senate seat. So we're going to do more of that. We're going to screen this film in many other places before the midterms, and we'll hopefully that will have an impact. And it's, you know, we all know that the only thing that changes is people getting out to vote. So if this film inspires people to get out to vote, we'd be thrilled.
So what is the role of film in this moment?
You know, in this moment, it may actually have a direct impact on politics, mm-hmm. And remind people that this has been going on for such a long time, and the fact that we have people speaking up, you know, these brothers saying what they say, that so much hasn't changed. I mean, I don't know for a fact, but mm-hmm. it's what makes us want to make these movies and hope that it does have an impact. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And, you know, it's funny because I made a movie before, you know, right before this one, on Sidney Lumet. And Sidney Lumet is a great director. I'm sure many of you know his work. Serpico, Network, Dog Day Afternoon. But what we discovered in making that movie was that he was directly implicated or felt impacted by witnessing a gang rape. Believe me, I did not connect these two when I decided to make the Rape of Recy Taylor. It was only later that I thought, my God, that happened to Lumet. And it's part of what inspired him, because he didn't step up and he didn't act the way he hoped he wished now, as he looked back, or when he was alive, when he looked back on this story, that he would have done something. But his characters came out of that situation. He ended up developing characters that spoke up to authority and believed in fairness and fought against the gangs. This was a gang rape, and his characters like Serpico and so many others, The Verdict, the lawyer in The Verdict, they push against gang mentality. And so I find myself looking back on these films and recognizing that there's
a common thread.
There's a through line.
Well, and there's a universality, as some of the commenters in your film point out, to the issue of rape and the use of sexual terror. So now we have an international movement, #MeToo, which is Balance ton port in France, and they've got another name for it in Italy. How do you feel this fits into that, and how did it...
You know, one of the things that came through in the initial days of the, quote, Me Too movement was that the black women were being ignored. That, mm-hmm. you know, and the Me Too movement was founded by a black woman.
Yes.
But the women who were speaking up were by and large white, and we were very caught up in a culture of white women who were, you know, bravely speaking up, and I champion their speaking up, and I hope they continue to do that. But they were speaking up because they were being harassed, and in some cases raped, within the workplace, and it had to do with power in the workplace. Mm-hmm. Whereas Recy Taylor was raped as a black woman. It had nothing to do with the workplace, but her life was in danger. Mm-hmm. Her life was very much at risk. So we wanted to draw attention to that, and mm-hmm. we were grateful that that understanding, that consciousness is now, I think, part of our culture now. It's taken a while.
And yet there was a piece that said this film shows how far we haven't gone because 16% of rapes, only 16% of rapes are reported across the board, white, black, Asian.
Right.
So how does that conversation change? How do you move that ball forward?
You know, maybe we could turn this to the audience.
I know.
Because I feel like we have to make the movies, but and do impact campaigns. And we, by the way, we have a very robust impact campaign that is being organized by one of our co-producers, Odyssey
Explain
Impact.
how that is measured.
Well, we together with Odyssey Impact will be showing this film in communities around the country that wouldn't normally see it, that don't go to film festivals, that may not see it on television when it airs, or may not go to theaters. And so we're reaching out to communities. I have to say that, you know, Oprah Winfrey, speaking about Recy Taylor, has helped us cut through that quite a bit. So rather than us having to reach out to communities, many of them are reaching out to us, and we've gotten screening requests. You know, we have, over more than 300 screening requests right now, and more are coming. So I'm grateful for Oprah that she mentioned Recy Taylor in her Golden Globe speech, but we still have work to do, and that's what our focus is.
What are some of the responses that you get from people? Because you screened at churches, you've screened in front of audiences of every color, every walk of life. What are some of the...
Well, I think that their feeling is that this is overdue, that this is a powerful movie and it has to be seen, and they want to know how they can show it. And by the way, we have a website where we make it available to people who want to show it in their homes, if they want to have screening events. I wouldn't even call them parties. But yeah, that's one thing we're doing. But I'd really be curious.
Let's open it up for questions.
Yeah, I mean, what more do you think we should be doing? There's a question over here.
Yes.
That's such a great question. There's a whole theme that we could have, and I wish we had the time to explore, about white women in general during the period, during the plantation days and during Jim Crow. They were often put on pedestals and sanctified in a way which gave the white men even more license to go into the slave quarters and rape black women, because they were supposed to treat their white women very delicately. Whether or not white women felt, to be honest with you, I don't know how the white mothers of the boys responded. We had a lot of trouble finding the boys, finding their families. We were lucky to find the two of them. So I wish I had an answer to that. I just don't know.
Yeah, they're probably not even alive now.
Right.
But that
Well,
would
the
be
mothers
fascinating.
aren't alive, no.
But I mean, it's the Black Lives Matters movement. I think
Yes.
these women didn't necessarily see these black women as fully human either. So
Right.
what difference did it make?
I think you're right.
They would be horrified if their sons raped a white woman, but not a black woman.
Right.
So, other questions? Yes.
I guess I'm so fascinated by your first comment, which was how you didn't know. And I think that so much more attention needs to be paid to that. You know, whenever we talk about race, people usually turn to the black community and say, well, how can we help you? And of course, James Baldwin said the disease really is not ours, you know. But it's been carefully constructed, you know, the way our communities have been set up so that we don't really live together in the suburbs and, you know, all these things, so that it's amazing to me that you don't know. I'm fascinated that in 2018, and now we're talking about people who are artists, who are, you know what I'm saying. I mean, they're educated, they're progressive, they care. That's an amazing job that's been done to make sure that the white community does not know our history. I still don't quite understand how it all was constructed. Yeah. But that's fascinating, and I think as a white person, they really have to look into that. I mean, how is it that in our history books we send our kids to these wonderful schools and there's all of this, and they manage to this day. My daughter goes to Brearley. I know what that curriculum looks like. To this day, there is so much that's not in that curriculum. And that's a very well respected, but rather traditional. I actually have, yes. And and then a group of black parents go and say, well, should we do? But again, it comes from the black parents. This is all part of it. How is it that we, to this very day, teach history that is so well curated?
Well, there's so much shame. I mean, look at what went on, rape and plunder. And it's not unique to us, to America, but it's a source of shame. So
But I think that it's more systemic than that. And I really, I mean, who's writing those history books, Who's developing these curriculum?
But it's the same, again, I always go back to the example of Jefferson, whom respected historians still want to deny had these children by Sally Hemings. And there was someone who said it was a moral impossibility. Well, it wasn't for every other plantation owner. He wasn't carving that much wood all those years that he was a widower. So there's a conspiracy of silence.
There is definitely a conspiracy of silence. And let's remember that we do know about lynching. Lynching was public, purposely, to put people in their place, to remind them what their status was in society. And rapes was a different phenomenon entirely. So there was, I would like to think that there wasn't shame on the part of the women. That's not why they didn't speak up. They didn't speak up because their lives were in danger. But maybe there was some shame on the part of men, or, there was a conspiracy of silence so that when they were finally brought in front of some kind of judicial system, they were never going to get justice because the people who were making those decisions were also complicit. Chances are they had raped when they were growing up, so it was a generational thing.
And that leads us to, the rape culture on campuses today and all this. It's all connected to that silence. So it harms everyone, but I'm amazed in 2018 that we're just beginning to touch this.
I agree. Well, at least it's coming out now, and the Me Too movement has powered a lot of it. But we felt it was our responsibility to draw attention to not the current culture, but something that started in the 20s, 30s. I mean, has been systemic for since slavery, since the colonies. So I hope that our film will be part of, and not the only thing, but part of a conversation that does change things.
Yes.
So I've heard talk about how we curate history, and I'd like to hear what you have to say about how we change that, how we change the narrative, and how we make it more inclusive, because American history is not just about white men, but it's about black women, Native Americans, Hispanics. How do we make it more inclusive? Or do you have any suggestions about that?
Well,
making the films you make.
Yeah, one way is to continue making these films, but I do think that it's about inclusiveness, and I think it's about the people who are writing the textbooks and the people who are creating the curricula, and I think that there's a groundswell of interest in honesty and transparency that we haven't seen before, and I think we have to maintain that, and I think it's up to all of us to put pressure on the people that are doing this, and that means parents whose kids are in schools to hold people accountable. So it's not just filmmakers and artists, although we like. I'm proud of having a voice in that conversation, but I think all of us have to do that.
The roles by doing a comment instead of a question, but I just wanted to say, because the last two questions are on this, I'm from Texas, which had the horrible controversy about history books you might have, I'm very embarrassed about. I was already gone, by the way, when that happened. But the reason I wanted to mention it is because that kind of stuff is decided at the local level, which are elections that people very rarely participate in, and the people who do are very rarely progressive, they're rarely younger, and they're rarely people of color. And so I just wanted to mention that, because if all of us in this room care about seeing our history told correctly, then you have to show up for, and I don't mean you, I mean collectively all of our cousins and everyone who were thrilled to vote in the presidential elections of 2008, they have to show up for the school board elections and the railroad commissioner and all these things that don't seem as sexy and interesting but decide stand your ground law, and whether or not slavery was a misunderstanding, which was one of the things being debated, is if there was a more empathetic way we could tell the story of slavery in terms of the masters in the state of Texas.
They get no love.
Oh my God.
I think we have a question up here, or we did.
Yeah, I had a question. Hi. First of all, you two are a great team. I'm going to say that.
We're taking our show on the road.
You should, really. An encore. Okay, this is my question, which might be a little bit sidetracked, but if I'm correct, Recy passed away recently.
Recy, yes, December 28th, 2017.
And I was just curious, because of her present awareness at the funeral, was there a difference of more people there? Or
Yes.
Tell me about that.
Right. No, she definitely, first of all, she knew about the film, even though she hadn't seen it. We were planning to bring it down to Alabama in January. But she passed away, and she passed away peacefully, which was very important to us. Her family felt that she knew that her story was finally out there in a way that she really needed it to be. So they believe that part of her peaceful passing might have had to do with that. I'd like to think it did. But yes, there was a lot more interest as a result of the film, and the funeral was packed. And then,
were there speeches?
We are doing a memorial service for her, not a tribute screening for her in Montgomery next Saturday, actually, a week from today. And then, of course, we're doing all these other screenings. Her family is very involved in the making of the movie. And Robert...
the spine of it, her brother and sister.
That's right. They're beautiful narrators of the film. And Robert... unfortunately, Alma, the sister, has also passed away, but Robert Corbett he came with us to the Venice Film Festival, and he was in New York, and we're going to show it at the Smithsonian in D.C. He'll be there. So he's integrally involved, and we couldn't have made it without him, frankly.
Well, she did have a moment of redemption, too, while she was still very much alive and around, which was in 2011, after this book, The Dark End of the Street, told the story, because the story had been buried. It was a international story, but it got buried, and this PhD student, Danielle McGuire, highly recommend her book, wrote about it. And so the state of Alabama actually apologized to her in person. I think the governor came, and it was all at her church on Mother's Day, the church that she had left the night that she was raped. Right. So there was a moment, at least, of redemption, belatedly, 2011.
Belatedly, and in fact, for some reason, there must have been a sense that maybe it's because it took place in Abbeville that for that family it wasn't quite enough. And so Robert did not give up his mission. He had made it his life's work to expose Recy Taylor's story, to tell that story, and to try to get more justice for her. So I can't help feeling that even though we're not the legal system, that somehow our film has brought her justice. And not just the film, but this swelling of interest in her, somewhat due to Oprah Winfrey's honoring her at the Golden Globes, that people do know who she is, and I don't think they're going to forget her. So I think there is some kind of justice in this.
When is the screening at the Smithsonian?
What is it?
When is it?
Oh, it's March 16th. Thank you.
St. Patrick's Day.
Wow.
Thank you. Thanks. We've talked a bit about, how we tell history, but really the history of this country has been, even today, to avoid conversations of race.
Indeed.
And not to acknowledge systemic racism, white privilege. White people don't want to talk about that. So I guess my question is, how many of your screenings have been in white, especially rural? I mean, even in, major cities, there's still issues about conversations of race. But I'm curious to hear about the conversations afterwards, like we're having, at places where these conversations don't take place at all.
I think, first of all, we're just getting started in a way. We had our festival run up until, I guess it was October or November, and then We had a small theatrical release in December. And so these impact screenings and other community screenings are really just getting going. But there are very diverse audiences, I'm happy to say. And I think that people who come to the film are somewhat self-selecting so that they're ready to have this conversation. And we have honest conversations just like we're having today. So I now, in a way, appreciate it even more than I have before, how important these talkbacks are. That it's not enough to see the film, that we have to have conversations where people feel they're in a safe place to talk honestly about rape and race and history and can talk about their disappointments of how dishonest it's been up until now.
Have you considered ways, though, to get this film and these conversations in places where they are not self-selecting, whether through use...
An NRA meeting.
Well, that would be... No, but I've had experiences with other people with films and other things where they have found ways in communities, whether through churches, youth groups, et cetera.
Well, we have, as I said, the impact outreach work that we're doing. A lot of it is faith-based, so we will be in churches a lot.
Right.
Yeah, a lot of it.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
So we hope you get to some of the white evangelicals.
Oh, and by the way, we are. We've done some brain trusts with these people, and they've attracted white clergy as well as black. So there's no question.
How do they respond?
Oh, they're fascinated. I mean, they want to do it, and these are clergy people that are pretty high up in the hierarchy of the church, and they absolutely are committed to getting this done. And so it's going to have its own life.
That's encouraging.
Yeah.
That's your next film, is the reaction to the Rape of Recy Taylor. I think there was another question somewhere in the middle. Yes.
Hi, thank you. Sorry. Thank you so much for being here. It's actually just more of a comment to highlight a memorial and museum that's opening up on April 26, 2018 by Equal Justice Initiative, if anybody's familiar with that phenomenal organization based down in Montgomery, Alabama. And so essentially there's a memorial and this museum that is talking about the legacy of lynching and bringing to light the history of our country that nobody really wants to talk about. So if you don't know of eji.org, I would very much encourage you to look it up. Just Mercy is a book that was written by Brian Stevenson, who founded Equal Justice Initiative. So just one more way to bring this into conversation, especially with students, with people who need to know this history. Saying that as a white person, talking to my white friends who need to know our history and actually own up to it and not be silent. So thank you.
Thank you. That's fantastic. That would be a good place to.
We know.
You're already in touch with them, way ahead of you.
But I'm glad that you brought it up because there's so many people that may not know of it. Yeah.
Yes.
Hi. We talked a lot about history, and being, an immigrant from another place.
You sound Haitian. I'm half Haitian.
Oh, Haitian? I'm from Senegal, actually.
Senegal.
But the French, you picked that. My question is, how far do we go to tell, quote unquote, the truth about history if it starts changing culture, right? In a sense where do we stop celebrating Thanksgiving, Columbus Day? Like, how deep do we go? Do we completely change the way of life of, these holidays that now became...
and tear down memorials.
Yeah, exactly. We've seen what happened in Charlottesville, et cetera, et cetera.
I'd like to think conversation isn't limited, and that goes as far as it has to go. I don't have an answer about all the changes in the culture. I think that's going to take a while for everybody to come up with what is the proper answer to that. Well, I honestly don't know.
In some places in the South, they're doing what they call contextualization, where they explain what something is.
Right.
So,
and that makes a lot of sense. It also, if you have a painting, for instance, in a museum that you may find offensive, but people feel that the art itself, or let's say the painter was, was a harasser or whatever, but the art itself is valuable, then there's a way, again, of contextualizing the art and explaining, the art itself, but also reminding someone of maybe the offense that the painter may have perpetrated. So I think that we're all trying to open this up and have honest conversations and be really transparent. but we, perhaps we are trying to save some pieces of the culture, and it's a difficult and challenging thing to be looking at.
I think we're out of time, are we not? So we want to thank you for this incredible film, which reminds us, as Eric Foner said in another session, Eric Foner just said in a conversation about 1968, rights are not self-enforcing. And this film not only magnificently reminds us of that, but of the power that the most ordinary person has in enforcing their own rights and standing for their own dignity.
Let me just mention, thank you, Susan.
Yes.
The film is showing again at 4 o'clock, and even though the salons are scheduled for 45 minutes, the film is showing in its entirety. It's a 90-minute film, so you're not going to be forced to leave in the middle of the movie if you decide to go to it. And it's showing again at 6. But there will be other screenings in New York and around the country.
So is there a website we can go to if we want to follow you around the country?
Facebook, and also our website is listing films as we confirm them. They are listing all of them, but we're also reminding you of it on our website. And so we encourage you to join the website, The Rape of Recy Taylor. It also gives you a chance, if you're interested in continuing the conversation, which I think today's conversation has been really a healthy one and an exciting one. Has given me personally a lot to think about. So, we'd love to continue the conversation with you. It's been a great audience. Thank you. And Susan, thank you very much.
Thank you.